Very good evening, viewers. We are joined by the peerless Neil deGrasse Tyson, celebrated American astrophysicist and writer. We've spoken, of course, earlier, Mr. deGrasse Tyson, some years back when India was on the cusp of history and made history eventually. Lovely to see you again. You always make me feel more enlightened after I finish speaking with you. So,
well, thank you.
We have an interesting conversation, and of course, what we also have, and I'm going to put you on the spot because I know that you're a betting man. So I'm going to ask you first to just lighten it all up and bring it down to earth, so to speak. Who do you think is going to win that big election?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. As a scientist, I look for hypotheses and theories that are supported by data and evidence, and then you can make a prediction. But politics is way too complicated for science. It's got human behavior that is fickle, human behavior that people vote how they feel more than how they think, and that's a factor in all elections. And so, yeah, I don't know. The polls all look very close. So, yeah.
Well, Mr. Tyson, let me tell you that some tried to turn polling into an exact science, and you know where that got them. So,
Yeah.
and in India, of course, we had a very, very strange situation where most of the opinion polls were showing a result in the favor of the incumbent by miles and miles, but actually they ended up short of the halfway mark. At least the BJP did. Anyhow, I'm going to now move away from earthly matters because that's where you come into your own. So, Mr. Tyson, India recently signed the historic Artemis Accord with the United States. Now, what does this mean for the world's space exploration future? This coming together.
Yeah, that's an excellent question and an important question. The Artemis Accord is not only between the United States and India, it's among a group of countries who, by signing the accord, agree to certain conduct and behavior and pathways in space, which includes, for example, if you make a discovery. So India was the first to land softly on the South Pole. Not the first to land on the South Pole, other South Pole of the moon. You can land not softly, and that's not a good fact. So India landed softly on the South Pole, and the first to do so. And that is a new frontier of exploration because the South Pole of the moon has craters where the crater wall is sufficiently high that sunlight never reaches the base of that crater. And if sunlight never reaches the base of that crater, the base of the crater stays very, very cold. And any comets that have hit the moon over the billions of years, if water falls into the base of those craters, it stays there forever. It does not evaporate during the lunar daytime. And so if you target that, then you don't have to bring water to the moon. You can go there and sort of mine it, if you will, from the surface of that crater. And also, water, we remember, is H2O. If you separate the hydrogen and the oxygen, that becomes rocket fuel. Mm-hmm. By bringing hydrogen back together with oxygen, it releases energy. So you can travel to the moon without having to bring your fuel that you would use to come back to Earth. So the point of the Artemis Accord is whatever anybody learns in space gets shared with everyone as part of that Artemis Accord, so that the community of spacefaring nations can advance together. And there are no secrets, and if you spot a danger, that gets shared so that the next mission will not be susceptible to it. So it's very important next step for the future of space exploration.
Well, it's very interesting because, I was watching a movie called Ad Astra for the infinite time. And we see this beautiful scene on the surface of the moon. Unfortunately, man's imprint means that we're also now, fighting over the resources there and mucking up that little bit of the universe. But that aside, you first have to set up moon bases, don't you? And that's not going to be easy, is it?
Well, so one note about the film Ad Astra, they took it to an extreme. I mean, there were pirates on the moon. Okay. You know, it's bad enough pirates in the ocean. Now they're going to be on the moon, stealing resources that are mined on the moon. And I wonder how real that is. Yes, it's a very low, uh, um, it's a very low feeling for how humans will behave in the future,
Right.
given that the opportunity to occupy another planetary body. But the point of space is that the resources are unlimited. They're unlimited, and you only have pirates when resources are limited, and they have to get your supply because nobody else has your supply. So I think the pirate portrayal was interesting, but I think it was not realistic. And think about all the reasons why people have waged war over the decades, over the centuries, over the millennia. There's three reasons. One is what God do you worship? Okay, that's one reason why people fight wars. Another one is, is your skin color different, or is there something different about your behavior? And a third one is access to limited resources. So a full exploration of space, I foresee, will completely remove that source of war among nations of the world, because the resources are unlimited in space. Okay, so now so Ad Astra, you made a point about it.
Yeah.
Coming out
How
of it.
how difficult is it to set up a base on the moon? And
Space.
yeah.
Yeah. So a problem is, whatever you do, you have to sort of set up like, let's say, a dome where there's air and, and all your supplies are brought into it. So to do that, you're setting up a place on the moon that resembles Earth. And so you're setting up Earth on the moon. The best way to do this, Elon Musk talks about this, we're far away from it though, is to, like for Mars, terraform Mars, one of my favorite words of recent decades, to terraform Mars, where you turn Mars into Earth. And then you just go to Mars and just step off your spacecraft. And so I see the images there with the two presidents,
Yeah.
Prime Minister and President Biden.
Yeah.
That was on Prime Minister Modi's trip to the United States, where he called for audience with me as he came through New York City, if memory serves,
Yeah.
where we chatted about India's future in space. And the Artemis Accord, I mentioned it to him in our meeting here in New York, and they nodded. And then when they got to Washington, they completed the ratification of it.
Yeah. So just to get a sort of timeline, look, how far away are we from setting up these moon bases, and what does it entail? I mean, it probably means that you have to move a lot of material up there, don't you?
Yeah. So think about it. It's one thing to live there, but it's another thing to visit there. And you can imagine a moon base where astronauts come and visit. That's what the space station is. Astronauts come and visit. And there's supplies up there. There's supply ships that are there. The moon is not that far away. It's a 3-day trip. Okay. It's not like Mars, which is 9 months, where if you run out of food, you're dead. All right. If the supply ship didn't make it. The moon, 3 days, that's within a news cycle. You can have all kinds of fun things happen over that period. So I can imagine supply ships, which don't have to have people on them, by the way. The supply ships can move slow, and they just deliver the goods, and they can be really huge, and they can deliver food and water until we set up a way to use the resources on the moon for our benefit. We would be bringing those resources to the moon. It's not weird or hard to think about that. So yes, but that would be still some time into the future. And you need a reason to do it though. I mean, think about it. Asteroids have raw materials that there's some asteroids that have more gold on them that have ever been mined in the history of the world. So asteroids, you want to talk about resources of the solar system, the moon is not the only destination. And so if you think about mining asteroids, the good thing about mining asteroids is if there's some company that's doing that, you give them a call and say, hey, there's an asteroid headed our way. Could you go hop over to that and deflect it for us? Thank you. Because if you're good at accessing asteroids and manipulating them and maneuvering them, they could be our great defense plan so that we don't end up extinct like the dinosaurs.
Well, look, what has ended up extinct really is the plan to keep ferrying men and women from Earth to the moon. 50 years, we haven't landed
Yeah.
anyone on the moon.
Okay, so that's a very important fact, and there's a lot of delusional memory thinking about that. Say, oh, we just needed leaders and with the resolve. No, 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 no. It's simpler than that. We just have to remember why the United States went to the moon, because we were afraid of the Soviet Union. They beat us at practically everything in space, hence the space race. They had the first satellite, the first non-human animal, the first human, the first woman, the first space station, the first black person who was from Cuba. Remember, Cuba sympathized with Russia at the time. They did it all. And we were afraid that the world would tip towards the Soviet Union's way of life rather than ours. And so we said, let us redouble this effort. And it wasn't just because John Kennedy said, let's do this, isn't it great? No, no, it was like there was a war driver. And war drivers are very powerful motivators in the history of human conduct. And so we go to the moon and watch what happens. We look over our shoulder and the Russians aren't there. Well, where are they? Are they going to? No, they're not. End of the Apollo program. We still have Apollo 18 that did not fly. It's in captivity in the Huntsville Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. You can see these are space-ready parts that never flew, okay? Because the program was cut. Why didn't we? That's why we didn't stay. Why didn't we go back? No motivation. 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. Oh, wait a minute. Somewhere around there, China says they want to put taikonauts, their version of an astronaut, on the moon. And it kind of wakes us up, right? And so we've been very good at reacting to a perceived contest or threat, much better than being proactive about it. So that's why. So we're going back to the moon. It's the Artemis program to go back to the moon. We have 3 missions. One already flew with no one on it. The second one should fly later next year.
Next year, yeah.
Next year, pushed back. That'll have a crew, but they're not going to land. And then the third one, Artemis 3, is going to go to the moon and land. And Artemis, you may know, if you know your Greek history, is the twin sister of Apollo.
Yeah.
So that was a nice sort of way to name that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, recently Elon Musk made history landing the Starship rocket back to its launch pad. We saw this big embrace and so forth. Now, how significant is that development? And given that this was done by a private player, what does this feat mean for private players keen to experiment with space?
Yeah. So let me make a few things clear. All right. If you were to fly from one of your big cities in India, let's say Mumbai, and you fly to, let's say, Paris, and you do that at, let's say, in a Boeing 747, if they just pushed the plane off the cliff and rolled out a new one every time you did that, that trip would be very expensive. So the fact that the plane gets reused is something that we just take for granted. Of course, you're going to reuse the plane. But you're not. Nothing else makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, until Elon Musk and the space shuttle did it a little bit, we hardly reused anything, and that added to the cost of every next mission. So Elon has not only been reusing his boosters, and those are the ones that people say they stick the landing on the bullseye on the launch pad. Just recently, from the Starship booster, here it comes, a great image there. Yeah, and right. People said their chopsticks go out and snip it. There it goes. Yes. And so that's a very important first step for reusability. And so Elon's major contribution to the frontier of space is how inexpensive can you make it so that going into space becomes something that's routine for everyone. That's really what's happening here. And you'd expect private enterprise to do things more cheaply. That's kind of how it has always worked, more cheaply than the government has ever done it. However, the governments do things for geopolitical reasons where the cost is not as much a factor. They'll just do it because they feel they need to. Often, big, expensive projects are done by governments first, then private enterprise comes in later. When Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand sent Columbus to the New World, when they did that, on their dime, they had a few investors, but basically it was on their dime. Does that expression exist in India? On their,
yeah,
okay.
it's quite common. Yeah.
On their dime, Columbus would come back and say, here's how far it is. Here's where the trade winds are. Here's where the hostiles are. Here's where the friendlies are. Here's where the food is. Once you know that and can characterize it, then private enterprise can come in. And that's what happened with the Dutch East India Trading Company. They were not the first Europeans to the New World. They came after governments decided what that voyage would look like. So that's exactly what's happening here. And by the way, NASA's budget is 1/30th the world budget in space.
Wow.
So private enterprise right now is leading this effort. And it's not just the cost of your satellite that's in orbit, it's the economy that it enables for being in orbit. All right. Uber, which is our emergent car service company here in the United States, they use GPS satellites. They didn't pay for those satellites. The American public did. And it was a military project initially. This is commerce, billions of dollars of commerce unfolding from space assets. So space is here to stay. And yes, private enterprise is a big part of this. And I see them possibly creating vacation journeys. Yeah, I would vacation on the moon. Put me in that little bubble. I don't want to stay there like forever. 3 days, that's all. 3 days on the moon, and I'm good. Definitely in orbit, the overview effect, where you don't see color-coded countries. You know, when I grew up, we all grew up, there's a globe in the back of the room of your schoolroom, and all the countries have colors. And I thought that was to learn the geography of the world. And then as I got older, and I said, no, I think I was being brainwashed or inculcated into identifying who our friends were and who our enemies were. I think that's because from space, you don't see national borders. Yeah. You see oceans and land and clouds as nature intends you to see planet Earth. And the more we get together and go into space together and we look back to Earth, it could be transformative for the peace of the future of civilization.
Well, Mr. Tyson, you know, it's very interesting because when you watch movies like The Gravity or Interstellar, or even, you know, Cosmos and stuff like that, we just look like this little dot. But aren't we the warmest, loveliest dot that we know? And I just find space so forbidding. And you said you want to spend 3 days. I don't know if I even want to go up there for a couple of hours.
No, you'll be in a spacesuit. You see, that's fine. Yeah. So, I mean, think about it. There are not many places on Earth where you can just run around naked and be completely comfortable. Look at all the places we live where we have a home and we pump in heat and we bring in food. We're already kind of doing that in order to live in places that are not just native to our evolution, right? And so it's just a few extra steps. A spacesuit when you go outside the dome. And don't you want to see Earth rise over? I mean, you know, well, actually, Earth doesn't rise on the moon, but you'll see Earth go through phases, right. And that'd be something you could talk about. It can change you. And there's a quote from Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell. After he went to the moon and looked back, he said, "You develop an instant global consciousness." This is from 1972. You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and say, "Look at that," as you point to Earth. It's like slapping them into reality. So yeah, I think you want to go. I don't want to speak for you, but I am. You want to go to the moon at least for a day or
Well,
two.
maybe we should send all our politicians up there first.
Yes, yes. Elon has got his Starship that could hold most of all the big leaders. Cram them in there, okay? Especially the ones that are fighting each other, and just send them to the moon. If they don't behave, we don't bring them back.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, well,
that's a plan.
Well, there is an Indian American astronaut right now is having a problem coming back. It's Williams.
Yes.
So
yeah. No, they'll come back, but not as soon as they had intended.
Yeah,
right. Remember, they're
exactly.
professional astronauts, so it's not like they're marooned.
Yeah.
And no, they're in a huge place. There are other astronauts there. There's food. Maybe they didn't bring enough underwear. I don't know for the trip.
Well, look, India is now getting into this Gaganyaan phase. We're putting our own manned mission. Of course, there's a lot of talk about whether we should be investing money, this, that, the other. I'm sort of always for it because, how are you going to push technology and this, that, the other? But how do you see India now fitting into this big league where you have all these people thinking of bases on the moon, going further, exploring for water and Saturn and Jupiter and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So let me back up for a moment. You commented that there are people who might say they should rather spend the resources in another way. And the unspoken element there is India still has rampant poverty. And if you don't have food in the street and you look up and you see that India is going to the moon, it's hard to square that, okay, as a political posture. But I can tell you, because we've been through this, all right, India had poverty long before anyone ever spent a dime on the space program, on ISRO. So you can't look at ISRO and say that's why India has poverty. There's something else going on that's not being solved. That's my first point. Second, any future economy is going to pivot on innovations in science and technology. Even old economies like farming is enhanced and improved and made more efficient by science and technology. So if you're going to bring India out of whatever doldrums, whatever state of economic stalling it had ever been, you're going to need to invest in science and technology in visible ways. And you saw it. I saw it. When India landed on the moon, people were dancing in the streets. Okay? That is a force operating on the ambitions of another generation. Too late for you, but for the next generation who will choose to study science and math, and that can transform India. And it's with those kind of economic opportunities that will ultimately, based on my read of history, help lift a country out of poverty. So whoever's saying, why are we spending money up there when we have problems down here? Here's my best example there. Let's go back to the caves 30,000 years ago, right? And the young cave dwellers, they look out the door and they see like hills and rivers and mountains, and it's so beautiful. And they go to the cave elders, who are in their 30s, because that's who the elders would have been back then, and said, we want to explore outside the door. And the elders caucus together and they say, no, we have cave problems first that we need to solve before anyone leaves the cave. That's absurd to any of us. And to an astrophysicist to say, we got to solve our Earth problems on this little speck orbiting the sun when there's a vast universe that could have solutions to so many of our problems, that would be very short-sighted indeed.
Okay, so my last question to you, I don't want to take up more of your time. The ISRO mission sort of, they sort of talk a lot about how they're doing this on a shoestring budget. But that's not really a solution, is it, for what you really need to? You really need to be putting in a lot more resources. That cannot be, in its own way, something that one should sort of, hold on to.
Yeah, I ran some numbers on this, and if I remember them correctly, it was just a month ago, that what India spends on ISRO is about the same fraction of its GDP that the United States spends on NASA. It's just that in the United States we have a much bigger GDP, so there's more total money being spent, but the ratio is about the same. And now, if you can do the same thing for less, do it. I mean, do it.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if there's something you want to do that costs more money, yes, this takes visionary leadership to say, yes, this would be worth it because we'll make this discovery. It'll continue to put India on the world map as a technology leader, as a space voyager,
Right.
and then, by the way, like I said, in the Artemis Accord, not everyone has to rediscover what's going on in space.
Right.
So, for example, if the United States does something, or the European Space Agency, or JAXA in Japan, if we discover things and you have a mission in mind, you can look at our research results and say, we can now improve our mission even more because now we know what these other nations have discovered. And so we can leapfrog in this way. And yes, you spend the money when you, if you can justify that it should be spent. And space has always paid dividends.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think you really, you really opened some minds here. Thank you very much, Mr. Tyson, for taking the time out. Thank you very much. Always come away feeling that we are A, on the right track, and B, of course, that we're wiser for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.